Hello and welcome to Not Another Recruitment Podcast. I'm your host, James Goddard. I'm joined today by Tony Payne.
Hi, James. Good to see you again. How's it going?
Yeah, it's good. It's good, Tony. It's been a very busy start to the year. I think a lot of people working in TA and recruitment are seeing January as a busy time anyway, but 2026 seems to have started well. So fingers crossed we see that going into the rest of the year. Definitely seeing more TA roles being posted. I don't know if you're seeing that on your end.
I think so, yeah, absolutely. I've definitely been pinged about it a lot more in the last sort of week or so. So I think that's a good sign.
Yeah, I think it takes a couple of weeks for the market to wake up from that first and second week of January. But yeah, certainly from the third week, I think it's been good. So I think what we wanted to talk about today were, well, I suppose it's a bit of a cheesy line, but debunking recruitment myths using data, which you are the specialist in. So it'd be lovely to maybe find out a little bit more about you, Tony, your background, and why you're here today.
Great, fantastic. Quick rundown of my background. I was 16 years agency side in 2 or 3 countries. I then moved in-house, and I've been there for the last sort of 10 years or so. Classically work with startups or scale-ups, so anything from sort of 30 to 1,000 FTE, generally in the tech side, so sort of fintech and AI is quite big at the moment, and a lot of that. And in the last sort of 4 years, I've been a fractional head of talent, again with startups. And also for the last 5 years, I've been designing and developing recruitment technology as well. So and that kind of plays into the data part, because I see a lot of reports, surveys, studies that really get into sort of the nitty gritty of what's happening, under the covers in TA.
That's really interesting. I think data is becoming more and more a part of TA now, especially with all of the different packages and applications that TA can use. You can also be a bit scared of it, be overwhelmed by data. There's so many choices in terms of what data are you looking at, what platforms are you using to interact with it. So I think that kind of knowledge of TA, both from kind of a product perspective and also from doing it, is really useful. I'm sure you'll bring a really interesting insight to the kind of conversation today. So I suppose the first question then, when we hear the term recruitment myth, what are the kind of top ones that you see most often in your day-to-day?
Well, if we sort of ignore the big one about ATSs, screening everyone's CVs for now, because I think we're all beyond that. I think one of the bigger ones that I'm still seeing, which I don't like, is about CV gaps, and big gaps on people's CVs, meaning that they are less employable. And this is total garbage. Yeah, it's really old-fashioned thinking, and when you question people on it, especially hiring managers, it's often quite inconsistent at how they apply it. So people see a gap in a CV, and the applicant explains it as they've been looking for a job for a year and a half. And they see another applicant who has been on a world trip and they've traveled for a year and a half. And they don't equate the two things as the same thing, which of course they're not. But actually a gap when you're traveling around the world doesn't count as an employment gap. So it's really inconsistent. I think what we need to get to is we need to understand that gaps are a natural part of a career. They're a natural part of our lives, especially since COVID. And if you look at the data, there's a lot of evidence-backed narrative that says that hiring people that have 12 months or so gaps in hiring is as effective, at least as effective, in the long run to performance and to productivity and results. So there's actually no difference. Actually, there are some advantages as well in terms of engagement, motivation, in terms of resilience, and it really can help a business to broaden their skills overall. Because also, if you think about people that had careers gaps, whatever the reason, whether it's because had children, or whether it's because of redundancy, or whatever it is, there are actually different skills that you would have picked up and learned while not working. And if you compare that to someone that was working all the way through, actually you learn different skills. So that's only got to benefit teams in the wider sense. So yeah, that's the first thing that I look at, that I think I really want that one to disappear.
If we could wave a magic wand and make it disappear, yeah. I'd agree with you. I think it's definitely a common misconception you see. I've worked predominantly agency side, and we'll take briefings with managers or And they will often mention career gaps being something that would be a red flag in a CV. It's interesting to kind of mine into the psychology of that. I wonder why that is, because I'm sure everyone at some point in their career has had a setback, or they've decided to take a break, and they probably experienced it themselves. I wonder why it is flagged as something that's a cause of concern, and what can we do to challenge it?
Well, so I completely agree with you. So when I was agency side, had exactly the same issues. And I think if you actually think about that, I haven't done that for more than 10 years ago, but you're seeing the same things come up. And so from my perspective, I think it's very much it's something that's passed on by bias. And I think that you have hiring managers that have been hiring for a long time. So let's just, I worked for a business not too long ago, and they were very big in the late 80s. So you've got people with that kind of experience, and the world has changed, employment has changed, hiring has changed, but those managers will be passing on those biases, and they'll be passing them on to their teams, to their, reports, that kind of stuff. And I think sometimes keep them going. They don't think about why they're actually asking for these things, and I think most logical people, if you sit them down and you explain what the possible benefits are, they'd be very open to changing their minds on these things. But I think it's very hard, especially if you're coming from a supplier perspective, to say, well, hang on a minute, what you're saying is fundamentally flawed. And so that's very difficult to do. And I think even internally, that's quite hard to do unless you really got a good relationship with your hiring managers. And so I think it's up to businesses to start showcasing success. And I mean internally, because I think across a medium to large size organization, they will hire people that have CV gap. And I think it's up to them to really promote those people and to say how well they've been doing despite this perceived lack of a gap to the other departments and the other hiring managers. And I think that's the way that businesses can improve things.
Sure. So I suppose it's an educational piece, challenging preconceptions and assumptions, which is that kind of, we've always done it this way, and highlighting success stories in the business. I suppose the argument that a manager may give, and I'm not saying that this is a valid argument, I suppose I'm playing devil's advocate to yourself and your frustration behind the myth, which I'm also frustrated with, is that maybe especially in a technical role, if someone's been out of work for, say, 12 months, 18 months, is it going to be slightly harder for them to pick up the skills that they've not been working with for that period of time and work at the same pace as the rest of the team that they're joining? Do you think that's a valid concern?
I think it would definitely take them longer, maybe a week or two.
Okay, that's interesting. So you think it could be that quick?
Yeah, most technical roles that I work on have a long list of requirements. It's very much a wish list because they're looking for people that can slot in and basically be up and running as of day one or day two, because it takes that long to actually just log into all of these tools. But fundamentally, if you're looking for someone that has knowledge of certain development frameworks, it's an advantage to know that framework. But most of the frameworks are really similar. Most of the languages are really similar. Whether someone has experience of TypeScript or Flutter or Next.js, they're all so similar that you can pick it up. And I think usually when we go back to hiring managers or teams and say, okay, we're struggling to find this exact skill, but what would be the next best thing? And then they say, well, do you know what? They could probably pick that up in a couple of weeks. And so, and that's for almost everything, especially when it comes to the tools themselves. So, no, in honesty, it's rubbish. It's not a setback. In fact, if you're going to pick someone up who's been out of work for 12, 18 months, they're going to be more engaged, more motivated to actually get up to speed than someone that's already knows the tools. And so I think, no, it's not a real one.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, because as a recruiter, I always compliment a manager if they say, we're not hung up on this person needs exactly this language or exactly this framework, because I think it's a bit of a kind of a blind alley they're going down, because they're finding someone who's exactly like for like to the person that they're looking to replace or the slot they're looking to fill, someone that could be up and running on day one. But what they're looking at skills-wise, they're missing competency-wise. So you could hire someone who's got a 50% skills fit, but if they're super smart, intelligent, driven, motivated, they've got a great culture fit with the business and a real reason to work, they're going to pick up that 50% skills gap very, very quickly. Whilst if the competencies aren't aligned, or the ethics, or the culture, then they might have all the skills but just not work well within that business. And if you could take that type of assessment and apply it to people that have been out of work for a period. So, if someone's been out of work for 12 months, they might not have 100% skills match, but all the competencies are there, the values are there. So why not give them a chance in the same way?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It sort of correlates with some thinking around what we call S-curve learning, where people learn things, they're slow to start, but then once they pick it up, their learning and their speed at doing new things is exponential. But then once they master that skill, which is a lot of the time what we're asked for, we're asked to hire masters of a certain skill, actually they're plateauing. They're slowing down with their learning of it. And in some instances, they're going to get bored of it and want to do something different. So actually, there's a lot of science and theory behind finding someone that actually isn't that great at a certain skill, but has potential to pick it up and maybe has complementary skills that would show a business that actually, this is something they can pick up really quickly.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So apart from that argument, and I suppose an ethical argument to say that it's great for businesses to help people back into the labour force, from a national perspective, in terms of that aspect, also helping individuals, who might have had setbacks or had to take gaps for various reasons. If you are trying to challenge that assumption using data, what data can you use to challenge it?
Well, I guess the first thing would be I'd look at various reports and surveys and research, because that's data that's done for you. And there's a lot of that about from very reputable sources, from places like McKinsey, from Deloitte, from Harvard Business Review. And they're sort of indisputable. So you can take them to your hiring managers and you can, hopefully engage in conversation. The other thing I think is actually showing success, as we mentioned earlier, in the business where people have been, really successful. And maybe there's also voices in the business that have been through this and can really help others to come into the business as well. I think if you look at high achieving women that may have taken time off to have children, that sort of thing, they would be great to highlight and to show around the business so that, hopefully they can hire more potential high flyers.
Good. That makes sense to me, because you're using external case studies, which, they're reputable, they're grounded. And I didn't know that there were so many. So I'll probably try to educate myself after this call. And secondly, use internal case studies. So times and situations where it's worked well, to talk about when hires have been made and they were successful, and maybe the longevity of the hire has been better against the average length of tenure in the business, or maybe after that ramp up period, the performance, if you look at the quarterly performance reviews or annual performance reviews, have been better. There's probably lots of ways to look at it to calculate how effective an employee's been, and whether that period out of work affects it at all. And I probably agree with you, Tony. I think after maybe a 12 or an 18-month period, you're probably looking at the same or better, and certainly not worse, based on the fact that someone's going to be able to skill up very quickly in a role, maybe even as quick as 2 to 3 weeks if it's something they're very familiar with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. I would say personally, although you've not asked me, a recruitment myth that really I would like to wave a magic wand and make disappear would be the idea of there being more applicants in a pipeline and that making the pipeline better. And it's something you forever see as a technical recruiter and get frustrated by, because it's sometimes very difficult to build a pipeline of 50 to 100 applicants to make that kind of cross-section. Sometimes you will only have 3 to 5 applicants that are going to be in any way qualified or worthwhile assessing. And it's interesting because I think that there's a myth that I see constantly spoken about, which is volume equals quality. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting one, because from a lot of the recruiters I talk to, some of the reasons that they don't invest in new processes or new tooling is because that they feel that the business will push back because they have so many applicants in the pipeline. So previously, in times gone by now, everyone would be struggling for candidates, especially in certain skill areas like the technology side of things. But now they're not. But I mean, it's an advantage in terms of it will keep you busy, but it's not an advantage in terms of filling roles. And again, so looking at some data, there was a great report by Ashby, who do the ATS, and they looked at 31 million jobs and found that between 2021 and 2024, the number of job applicants on average tripled.
Wow.
And it was quite big then anyway. So, and that tripling, what it causes is a lot of downstream effects. And it's not just about the number of applicants. Within that report, 60% of the companies reported that their time to hire had increased in that time. So it's taking them longer to fill the same number of jobs. It also showed that recruiters are interviewing 40% more people for the same number of jobs.
Wow.
So loads more applicants, loads more interviews, but the same number of hires. So recruiters are doing more work for the same result. Okay, so from that perspective, that's not great.
No.
And obviously we talk about how companies are expecting more with less and all that kind of stuff. And so that is a big problem for the industry as a whole, really. What that also has, though, is knock-on effects, because that starts to change recruiters' behaviours. And that's probably the more dangerous thing long term, because it makes the recruiter act in a more short-term way. It makes the recruiter act in a more just fill the role now way. And what that comes out as is focusing on experience in a CV as the be-all and end-all. And so there's no focus on the potential. There's no focus on complementary skills or how that might benefit the organization. And purely from a time perspective, and the people that I've spoken to, the recruiters have tended to, now they've got all of these applicants, there's so many of them, even in technical roles, they focus purely on the criteria, the technical criteria. So, for example, you said earlier, teams and hiring managers are asking for certain skills. Does it matter if someone doesn't have those skills? And we said not particularly, because they can pick them up pretty quickly. But that question doesn't get asked anymore because there's so many applicants. And for example, if you've got 5 must-have knockout criteria, you will find more than enough applicants that have all of those criteria. So all of the people that previously would get a chance because they're close enough now aren't getting anywhere near an interview.
They're getting screened out effectively by the sheer number of candidates passing through. Yeah.
That's it, exactly. And again, if you sort of think about how we all approach screening, so when we do it ourselves, we tend to go yes, no, maybe, save it for later. I mean that's generally how I've done it in the last 25 years. The problem now, though, is that you've got so many coming in that are in the yes pile, and then you've got loads of no's that you can screen out. You don't ever get to the maybes, and so you then the next day you get another load in, and then the next week you get another load in. So it's always that top tier, the people that have got all of the must-have requirements, right? And the problem with that is that they're a much less diverse cohort. Yeah, if you're looking at hiring, the big barrier to diversity is actually the job requirements themselves. Because the more experienced people that have the skills and the experience, and they've been in different sectors, they're generally a less diverse group of people, and it's the ones in the middle, it's those kind of the maybes that have all of the diverse, and because they've got less experience, but they've got the core skills that are needed for the job. And right now, not enough of those people are making it to interview.
So you've almost got an automatic bias then. So it's something that isn't being enacted consciously by people, but it's there because you've got this kind of super abundance of candidates coming through processes. And then when you're reviewing it, you're always going to prioritize people that have a higher skills match, but then you kind of miss the rest of the picture when you look at candidate suitability, and create quite an exclusive kind of filtering methodology for the candidates, probably excluding diverse candidates from the mix.
Yeah, and like you said, it's sort of an unconscious one rather than a conscious one.
Yeah.
But and also, as we just said, you're interviewing a lot more applicants, so it's not like you're getting a better quality, you're just getting more. And at a certain point, you end up as classically, as a recruiter does, a recruiter is not looking for the perfect person. A recruiter is looking for the best person available at that time. And so you've interviewed, let's say, 20 people, you will put forward the best 3. whether they're really the best three or not. That's what you've got. That's what you put forward. And so, so that sort of that tier of people that could do the job but haven't got as much experience as others are just not getting a look in at the moment. And so I think that's the big underlying problem with having so many applicants.
Well, how do you solve that problem then? Because it's both a problem and also a benefit to recruitment teams in the same kind of sentence. Because as you say, if you time travelled 6 or 7 years ago, the number one problem was a lack of applications coming through, which meant it was very difficult to fill hires, and it was costly, and there was a long time to hire. And I suppose what we're saying is that increased applications don't necessarily solve all those problems, because they create their own problems around time to hire and difficulty to hire, because it's more of a time investment piece. So the recruitment team is having to speak to more people and have to process more, which just increases time and spend as well. But at least I suppose there are candidates in process for them to profile to then put into process versus no one at all. So there is a benefit in that regards. But I don't think it's ever going to go away. I think the world has shifted now so that there are so many more channels for people to apply through. There's the kind of the old auto reply on LinkedIn, which is, I think, a real driver of candidate volume and traffic. Everyone's being told to apply to lots and lots of roles at the same time. There's so many tools now for candidates to be able to push out those mass applications. I don't think they're ever going to go away unless there's a really significant change to kind of world labour markets. So how can a TA team solve the problem, I suppose?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Not sure if we have the answer, but
No, well, exactly. There's definitely not a quick fix for it. Otherwise, people will be using it. I think there is the technology aspect and the ability to use technology in certain ways, and I think that is company dependent, and people have to really think about how that might help them. But actually, before you do that, I think TA teams need to, and businesses as a whole, need to really think about what is actually going to move the needle for them, and sometimes moving the needle means increased productivity, it means increased innovation, it means increased profits, it means increased customer satisfaction. All of those things, how do you get them? And I guarantee the answer to that is not hiring as quickly as you can.
True, yeah.
Yeah, the answer to that is to hire the right people with the right behaviors and mentality for your business. And so whether that's skills-based hiring, which I know which is on the rise, but can be tricky for some businesses, whether that's utilizing technology to enable that identification of potential instead of just the experience, whether that's just as a TA team coming together and saying, okay, let's really think about the level of hire that we need and not just go straight for experience all the time. And sometimes that's a conversation with the hiring manager. And as you said, when we talk to hiring managers, we say, okay, if you don't have this scope, don't have this scope. I think what is generally a better way of looking at it is that when you're talking to hiring managers, you actually say, okay, so you've laid out what the perfect hire would look like. What would the next best thing look like? What would you feel would also be very good at doing this job, but maybe would give them room for growth as well? Because the classic thing is that hiring managers are saying, okay, and you see this on job specs still, which is technically illegal, but everyone's still doing it. We need 5 years experience in this type of job, but actually what you're saying by that is saying we need someone that can come in and do it because we don't want to waste time training, and we appreciate that you're going to get bored soon and you're probably going to want something else, but for that time we're going to pay you a high salary. That's really what you're saying. Whereas if you're looking for the same underlying skills, but you have someone that can step up into that role and has the potential and the complementary skills, you're not only potentially hiring someone at a lower salary, which is going to be good for the business, but they're going to have a lot of growth, a lot of motivation, a lot of space to innovate within the business. And then I guess coming full circle to where we were at the beginning, a lot of reports, a lot of studies, again, the McKinseys of the world, they say that diversity in hiring causes increased chance of profitability, increased customer satisfaction, increased engagement, increased motivation, and more productive teams. So I think that's somehow how TA teams have to help their businesses to start to improve.
I think you make a number of interesting points there, Tony. One I'll go back to, which I thought was a very interesting point, was around how putting the amount of years someone needs to have experience in on a job ad as being, maybe a bit grey area, borderline. I imagine discriminative was the kind of line you're going down. But what is the status of that then, as in kind of UK employment law? Is it something you're not allowed to do? Because that's something that people have opinions on. I've never really heard someone make such a strong case against it.
Yeah, I believe, and I haven't checked it recently, but I believe you're not allowed to put in a certain number of years of experience of something that you're looking for discriminatory reasons.
I know it's illegal to put down must be a recent graduate, for example, because that's linked directly to ageism. And, of course, if someone wrote something preposterous like, no one over the age of 40 or no one who's going to retire in the next 5 years, that's obviously all discriminatory language. So I think there's definitely a case to be made for it. But yeah, it'd be interesting to look into that, see how truthful that was. But I suppose going back to your other point around D&I and it being more than just the right thing to do, it being both the right thing to do and also important for a business. I've seen that a lot as well. I've seen a consultancy called MindGym make a really interesting argument, which said that basing D&I as only an ethical argument in business is actually a mistake, because it will sometimes be forgotten or kind of drowned out within the C-suite of certain organizations. So certain organizations will have a real ethical lean, which is great. And there's loads of businesses that are businesses for good and are very ethical. There are lots of businesses that are ethical, but that's maybe not their main purpose, and their main purpose is shareholder value. And so to push a D&I agenda, you have to link that to shareholder value, because otherwise it's never really going to get backed by the senior leadership team. So it's interesting you mentioned that. Sorry, Tony, go on.
Yeah, let me read you one thing.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So this is a McKinsey report, not too long ago, a couple of years, and it says gender diversity is consistently associated with better business performance, innovation, and decision quality. Also, profitability, team performance, risk management, and talent management. So I will agree with MindGym. I think if a business leadership isn't prioritizing diversity, I think they are negligent.
I think certainly from a risk management perspective, because there were a number of studies done after the financial crash of 2008, 2009 of leading investment banks and retail banks, and a lot of the senior leadership team were comprised entirely of men. And they actually saw that when there was a stronger female component in board, especially within senior leadership decision-making strata, there was a more kind of risk-aware adoption, which meant that they were less likely to, leverage 90% of the bank's liquidity in, bad mortgage debt and get into some sticky issues there. So that's certainly borne through, and I'm sure McKinsey will be kind of bringing studies like that out in their report. And then just anecdotally, I think if you don't have representation, and that could be from kind of both a gender and also kind of cultural representation, you really struggle to hire top performers in the different kind of diversities. So if someone, a woman comes into a business and is interviewed by a senior management team that are all men, that does kind of tell that person that for whatever reason there isn't that representation, and it might be more difficult to make hires like that, which automatically limits your access to the talent pool. So it's again automatic, subconscious. Very few businesses these days set out to say, I don't want to hire, X or Y, because that's just not how it's done anymore. But these things happen without people realizing it, and it can affect your access to really great talent on the market.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of strands to this. It's not just about gender either. It's about
of course,
all protected character. Again, I'm not going to bring out any more data, but ethnic diversity.
It's a data podcast, Tony. Go crazy. You're bringing as much data as you like.
Yeah, well, I think Deloitte said that diverse and inclusive businesses are 6 times more likely to be innovative and twice as likely to have financial success. And similarly, the customer satisfaction element is a huge thing linked to diversity as well. And you can imagine that a lot of businesses, it's a big advantage to have people that can empathise with their customer base. So
Yeah, absolutely.
It's logic as well.
It just makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. If you are in a multicultural economy and you're not kind of embracing that diversity, then your understanding of your customers' needs, problems, wants, desires will not align as closely as if you were, more diverse and more welcoming of people from lots of different backgrounds. So, as you say, it's both common sense and it's kind of backed up in the research. I mean, again, anecdotally, I've worked a lot within advertising, which has been an interesting journey over the last kind of 10 or 15 years, because that's an industry that's really embraced diversity and inclusion. And for me, it makes sense, because if you're paying a business to kind of advertise or market your products, and they don't understand the mindset of all your customers, then that they're not going to be great at doing that. So it's really important for those types of businesses to kind of embed that as a foundational piece in their hiring. And I think there's lots of advertising and media companies that are really far ahead in that, and they're doing some amazing work. So yeah. Okay. So I think there was one other myth we wanted to talk about, which is, we wouldn't be a recruitment podcast without talking about AI. So it would be AI rejecting my application. So I think it's kind of a commonality when you're speaking to candidates at the moment, and it's real kind of empathy for people looking for a role. It's a really tough market. It's only really just started to improve. As we were saying, applications are up by times 3, times 4 across the board. So it's a very difficult market to cut through it in. But I think kind of a common conception people have is that their applications are being screened out by AI, and either it's not worth making an application, or they have to somehow optimize their application to deal with these kind of mythical recruitment AI agents that are kind of screening them out. What would you have to say about that, Tony?
Yeah, so just in case there is anybody here that isn't aware, that's not happening. So it's a complete myth. It's a huge myth in the sort of the job seeker population. And unfortunately, it is now, there are recruiters that are picking up on it and passing that on and believing it. And it's simply not true. So first off, there's very little actual AI being used for screening at the moment. Businesses are still wary of it because not too many have actually taken it up. Where they have, most recruiters are using it for prioritization, but they're still reviewing every single CV. And the other thing that I get, so every week with applications, I get, so I've sent out rejections, and I will get replies from applicants saying, look, your stupid AI algorithm doesn't recognize that I've got all of this experience. How can you reject me? So literally every week there's a response email that goes, well, okay, it wasn't AI, it was me.
It's me, Tony Payne. I read
exactly,
your CV.
I reject you. I'm sorry. And this are the reasons why. And it's quite easy to get all kind of angry about it, but you've got to have that empathy. Like you said, there's so many people looking for jobs. There's so many applicants for every job. It's really hard. It's basically a full-time job to find a job these days. So you can't really expect job seekers to understand sort of these intricacies or to not believe what everybody's saying. And then the other aspect of it is that you mentioned, you have to write your CV so that it's filtered correctly by AI.
Yeah, AI, corresponding, so it doesn't get automatically filtered.
Yeah, and it used to be that you took out AI and it was the ATS. It was like, okay, Workday screen my application, and if anyone knows, in most of these systems they have absolutely no way of doing that. They're definitely not that technically advanced. But AI is, but AI is actually a lot smarter than people think. So, for example, these CV writers that are charging fees to rewrite people's CVs so they have some keywords in them, which is absolute rubbish, because AI actually understands the nuances of roles and the underlying skills in roles. That's part of what's programmed into it, how it's trained. So, a simple example, if you apply for a job and on your CV you've got job title receptionist, you don't put anything else about the job, and then you're applying for a job that requires telephone skills. Well, the CV writers are telling you, okay, you must list and everything that you've done on a telephone, But actually, it's wrong. Yeah. AI knows that a receptionist will use the telephone. That it's that simple. So actually, you can probably get away with applying for jobs with a lot less information on your CV if AI was doing the screening. That's not my advice, by the way. My advice is always to tailor your CV to every job application, and use it to get the details, and add that to your CV if you need to be. But no, you need less information for AI to actually recognise you than more. So yeah, this AI rejecting my application thing, I'd like to banish that, but I'm realistic enough to know that that's never going to happen.
Yeah, I suppose it's quite in the kind of the popular consciousness now, so it will be hard to dismiss. I would agree with you. I think everything I've seen, both agency side with agency CRMs and kind of in-house with ATSs, you will have some advanced ATSs like your Ashbys or your Team Tailors, Pinpoints of the world, Workable Greenhouse, those kind of like next generation ATSs. Sorry if I've forgotten to talk about any ATSs, by the way. Please don't, kind of find me and hunt me down. They'll have a component of kind of like grading criteria. So you could like plug them into where your job applications are coming from. You can have a job spec that will scan, and then it will look at applications coming through, and it will kind of give you a grade. So it'll give you like a percentage, and it will actually create a rough traffic light system, like you're saying, Tony, going to be like green, yellow, red. But very rarely will recruiters lean on that. I certainly wouldn't. I don't trust the system to that extent, and I know that most people wouldn't. They would if there were very specific red flags, like someone's answered the question, I've not got a visa to work in the UK, and it's just an automatic kind of dismissal. But that's not kind of a competency read of the CV. That's kind of a yes or no higher fit question. So I would agree with you to kind of comfort everyone out there. AI isn't screening your CVs. Real recruiters, such as me, such as Tony, and many others are reading your CVs. And, if they're being rejected, hopefully they're being rejected by a real person. And then hopefully that person is sending you an email to say that your CV's been rejected. But that's kind of one of the reasons maybe feeding into it is people aren't even getting feedback on CVs. So they'll submit their CV to 20, 30 places, and then maybe only half of them bother getting back, and kind of feels like you're just shouting into a black hole or sending applications out without hearing anything. So you think there's some degree of automation going into it.
Yeah, 100%. I think that the biggest problem is the same problem it's been for a while, and that's communication.
Communication, yeah.
And I think don't need to go into too many of the reasons about that on here, because it's all within talent. But if there were job seekers looking at this podcast, I'd say that you need to understand the volumes that are happening, and you need to understand the time pressures that recruiters are under to get people through a process. They naturally have to focus on the ones that are advancing in the process, not the ones that are not advancing. However, none of that is an excuse for not letting someone know that their application has been received, because that can be done with every ATS now.
Yeah, almost instantaneously. When you close a job down on LinkedIn, it's an option you're offered. I think every single ATS offers you that when you change someone's stage from accepted to rejected, or interview feedback, etc.
Yeah, exactly. So there's no excuses for not wrapping something up now. And even if it takes a little bit longer, it's worth wrapping it up. I mean, that's happened with me sort of recently. There's been some things, and it's taken longer than I would want it to reply. And however embarrassing it is to go back to someone and say, look, sorry for the delay, but at least they know, and they can kind of, cross that out on their spreadsheet.
I think people still appreciate it. So I've done that. Maybe it's been 2 weeks. I have to go, listen, I'm really sorry about this. I did have the feedback. I've not delivered it in a timely way, and that's my learn. I need to get better at this. It's very rare that someone will turn around and kind of cheat you out for it. Most of the time, they're still appreciative that you bothered. And I'm kind of going back to your point about D&I. I think giving candidates the experience of closure in their job application, it's not just the right thing to do, because it's definitely the ethically right thing to do, and it's the empathetic thing to do, and we'd want it. So, act to others like you'd like them to act to yourself, and all that good stuff. But I think it's also beneficial for a business long term, because it's good for your talent pool. It means that you're speaking to people, and then you're not just instantly putting them off your brand when they apply or they go through the process and they don't hear anything back. They might interact with your job ads later. It's very unlikely that if you've interviewed someone and you don't give them feedback that they'll ever apply again. Whilst they might not be right for, X senior engineer role, they might be right for a mid-weight engineer role that you might be hiring in 6 months' time. So you keep them as an active candidate. And also, they will be telling their friends and people in the community about you, maybe not even future employees, but future customers of the brand as well. So I think if a brand gives good feedback to candidates, whether they've been successful or unsuccessful, that they're putting good branding out into the world. So it's the clever thing to do as a company. So talent teams should really be trying to do it.
I think often with these situations, I go, how would I want to be treated?
Yeah.
And just leave it at that. And, and that's your answer. So, and I think because at the end of the day, everyone in talent is also a job seeker at some point in time.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a cyclical job, things go up and down with businesses. And so they want to be treated in the right way as well. And so I think that's generally how I look at things.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice kind of way of looking at it, Tony. And I've really enjoyed our chat today. So thanks for giving me some of your time, for giving me lots of case studies from McKinsey and Deloitte, and kind of breaking down some of the recruitment myths that exist out there.